First I just wanted to tell you a little bit about myself, where I come from, why I do this research, and so forth. I am from New York City. I worked for many years as a costume designer. That is my actual background. I came to Santa Monica when I was 30 years old, got married, started a family, and not with him, he's the product of the family. And I got involved in my neighborhood organization, which, because I lived in a 1903 house and was very interested in that aspect of our neighborhood, I ended up on the Landmarks Commission. And during the course of my work on the Landmarks Commission, we would get a report. I would say, why didn't they tell us about that? And I would start looking for more information on my own. And over the years, I got more and more into that. So in about 2015, I think that was the year, we designated Palisades Park as a landmark, and I was chair of the Landmarks Commission. And there was a lot of really interesting stuff in the report, and a lot of things in the report, they said, well, we don't really know where this came from, but further research is warranted. And I was like, well, that's not okay. So I started doing research into all the artifacts in Palisades Park and found out all these great stories. And as I got more into it, I thought, I know, I'm going to make a book about Palisades Park. And so once I got into that, I realized that every phase of development in Palisades Park was really heavily influenced by political things and other things that were going on in the rest of the city, and that it was a mirror of the city. And that got really interesting. And so I reorganized it and started rewriting it so I could expand it. And that just got completely out of control. And I abandoned the Palisades Park theme, and I started writing a book, and each chapter is a theme in the history of the city, and it begins at the beginning of the founding of Santa Monica and follows through to the end. So the book is called Along Came Jones, and it follows when he comes along until the end of that theme. Railroads, ostrich farms, whatever. So I'm almost at the end of the book. I've read maybe 500,000 of the million artifacts they have here. Maybe not that many, but I've read quite a few. And I had 2 chapters left. One was the airport, and one is actually Jones's personal biography, because they have an amazing collection here at the History Museum of Jones papers that I wanted to go through. But it's a big job, so I saved it for last. So I'm writing about the airport, and as we know, a lot of discussion is going on in our community about the airport. And I'm learning all these incredible stories that I had no idea about that have national and international significance that happen in the airport surrounding Douglas Aircraft. And the genesis of the Rand Corporation and things like that, that pretty much blew my mind. So I decided to jump ahead and, as Eli said, release the single before the album and make this book that comes out before what we call in my house the big book. I have no idea how I'm going to publish that. It is so many pages, but it'll be really good for boosting children who are sitting on regular chairs at tables. So basically, I come to this book from a historian's perspective. I just wanted to know everything. Over the years, I've collected a bunch of resources that are places I can find things about Santa Monica, and I've learned how to mine them and trick them into telling me things that I want to know in a factual way. And I mined every one of them for this book. I have in my computer almost 9,000 articles and images and what I call tidbits of information that I've collected about the airport in order to create this. So Today, oh, well, let me just go over, just in case you wanted to know, the book covers as much as I could find, and I didn't edit it, I don't have an editor. So I am unedited, which means everything I thought was interesting is in here, and you may not think that much is interesting about the airport, but I apologize. So the book starts with early aviation and the wing walkers who were here and the maverick flyers who gave their lives to pursue aviation and how the airport started. And then we get into Donald Douglas and the round the world flight, which is what gave the book its name. And I'll read you from that chapter. It talks about the influence of the airport on the Sunset Park neighborhood, how the whole bond situation to purchase the land that became an airport and a park and how that came about. It talks about the Women's Air Derby, which was called the Powder Puff Derby. I don't think that Will Rogers was disparaging women when he said that, because what I discovered is they were supposed to take off at 1-minute intervals, but it got so dusty that it was impossible for them to do that, and so they would have to sit and wait for the dust to settle, and I think that's why he called it the Powder Puff Derby. So anyway, just a little defense of Will Rogers for you. It talks about World War II, the camouflage that was over the airport. A chapter called Douglas Town talks about the whole culture of Douglas aircraft, which is pretty amazing in itself. I always say Donald Douglas was not only an engineer, but he was a great businessman and a master of operations research. The way he engineered the growth of his business is just as interesting as the way he engineered the airplanes. And there's another chapter. One of my friends said he stayed up until 3 a.m. to read this chapter on the unionization of Douglas aircraft, and of course how Rand started at Douglas Aircraft. So I kind of cover a lot of stuff, which is why it's 350 pages, so I apologize. So the section I'm going to read to you today is about the round the world flight. So Donald Douglas, he went to MIT, he was a star student, he got all of the best jobs, such as they were, in a nation aviation industry that nobody could make money for. Really, the only way to make money was if you were involved with the military. But he did get a few jobs. He was living in Ohio with his wife, and his wife was like, I'm done with this snow and this cold, and we got to move to California. So they moved to California, and he found a partner who was mostly a financier, and this guy wanted to build the first plane to fly across the country. So with his money, Donald Douglas built this airplane called the Cloudster. They only built one. They built it in a second-floor factory in downtown LA. They had to bring the parts down in the elevator shaft and then cart them to the airfield and put them together. And it made it as far as Texas and had a few problems, but they called it the Leviathan of the skies, and it was the heaviest plane to ever be built that could carry enough fuel that it could actually have flown across the country, and probably would have later. It was repaired, but everyone lost interest after that. And the US Navy took notice. So after they finished with the Cloudster and his partner ditched him, he decided to move to Santa Monica. He liked boats and he wanted to be closer to the ocean. So then he started looking for a place to work in Santa Monica and ended up renting land in what we call Douglas Park now. Then it was Padre Park. It had been our first reservoir, and that reservoir was abandoned, and anyway, you'll read about that in the book. So on the strength of the Cloudster, he got a big contract with the US Navy to build a bunch of planes. And he was off and running because the Navy was the only person anywhere paying for aviation. And within 3 years, he had a multi-million-dollar company, and we're talking the 1920s. So it was a big deal. In 1923, so that's 2 years after the Cloudster, the Navy came to him and said, we want you to build a prototype plane that will be able to fly all the way around the world. This is in hops, by the way, not in a single flight. And so he built a prototype, and then he built 4 planes, and they selected 4 captains and seconds, so 2 person per plane, to fly around the world. They built them in Santa Monica. They left from Cloverfield, and they returned from Santa Monica. Other cities throughout the whole preparation of the planes before they left were lobbying. They wanted to be the place where the planes left from, but they left from Santa Monica on March 17th, 1924. So there was a big send-off, a huge air show. It was a big deal. People came from all around. There was nothing going on in the area, so the subdivisions around made great parking lots. One plane crashed when they got to Alaska, which was pretty early on. It got lost in the fog, and so 3 planes continued the flight, went all the way back, and then in Iceland, shortly before they returned to North America continent, another one had a mishap. They substituted it for the prototype that they had built before the 4 planes. So even though 2 planes actually did make it all the way around the world, 3 planes arrived at the very end. So while I read this, it's already started. This is a newsreel or a collection of newsreels about the round the world flight that the Army recorded. And it shows the pilots stopping in all different places. You'll see them before they leave having a picnic with their wives at Cloverfield. You'll see them getting into their 50-pound flight suits because they had to wear very warm clothes because it was cold up there. And it's just a pretty cool video, so you don't have to look at this the whole time. So I'm going to read you my little section here. So, when the flyers left Santa Monica on March 17th, 1924, reporters and photographers from the New York Times and the London Mail were in the crowd. Santa Monica boosters were thrilled when images and reports of the history-making events in Santa Monica were seen around the world. With events to celebrate the return of the flyers already planned, Santa Monica leaders learned from a congressman in July that Seattle, you can boo anytime I say Seattle, that Seattle had finally successfully foisted the honor of being named the final terminus of the world flight. All of Los Angeles County was incensed by the change, and a kerfluffle ensued. He's going to hold the mic. He's an excellent assistant. General Patrick in Washington claimed that a terminus in Seattle would cut 19 days off the journey because of weather-related and mechanical delays during the first legs of the trip. As a consolation, he offered stops in Santa Monica and San Diego after the big return and the close of the trip in Seattle. Santa Monicans hit the roof in their disbelief. All along, the point of the trip was to encircle the globe however long it took. It was never supposed to be a race for time. The flight actually, really, and truly began in Santa Monica, and there it should end. Mayor Steele wrote to General Patrick directly, urging him to restore the official final stop to Santa Monica, where they were already making elaborate preparations to receive the flyers. The general was inundated by wires from supporters of a Santa Monica terminus, including from some of his personal friends and former classmates who were enlisted to assist in the campaign. California Governor Friend Richardson joined, writing to President Coolidge to ask for an inquiry about the change of venue for the return of the Flyers. A response came from Acting Secretary of War J.L. Hines in Washington, D.C., who claimed that Seattle had been the official starting point of the flight from the beginning, stirring the pot all the more. This in the face of the fact that the Air Service had selected Santa Monica as the starting point, and that New York and London papers had proclaimed to the world that the start was in Santa Monica. Somebody lied was the oft-repeated expression in Santa Monica and Los Angeles. In August, the New York Times reported that many now believe another age is being ushered in by the intrepid United States Army Flyers who left Santa Monica, California on March 17th. That reporting didn't do anything to restore the terminus to Santa Monica, but it provided validation for the angry Santa Monicans. Plans proceeded apace for the welcoming celebration at Clover Field when the aviators did finally arrive as promised by General Patrick. Thousands of spectators were expected from all over the region, but details were kept under wraps, so Seattle couldn't outdo them. Major Martin, the disappointed flyer who crashed before the flights crossed the Pacific Ocean, came forward to defend the justice of Santa Monica retaining the honor of being both the start and the finish of the flight. The other flyers soon joined the chorus in favor of Clover Field, noting that ending in Santa Monica would not only be fair, but would save their well-used planes the many extra foolhardy miles involved in a trip to Seattle and back at the end of the journey. General Patrick issued his decision on the matter less than 2 weeks before the flight ended. Seattle was named the technical finishing point, implying that Santa Monica was the actual finishing point without commitment. By naming Seattle, he reiterated 19 days can be shaved off the final time calculation for the trip, which would look much better in the record books. His orders were that the Flyers would continue from Seattle to Sacramento, Santa Monica, and finally San Diego. With no time to lose, preparations for the return of the Magellans of the Air to Clover Field went into high gear. Donald Douglas was to receive a trophy, and a spectacular air show was planned. A half-mile of bleachers with reserved seating for 15,000 people waving American flags were set up at Clover Field. Tickets were on sale at a number of businesses in town. Plenty of standing room area was available at no cost for 100,000 or more additional flag wavers. The round-the-world Flyers would approach Clover Field from the east through the break in the eucalyptus trees and land within 50 feet of where they had taken off 6 months earlier. Then the planes were to taxi across a flower-strewn field to stop in front of a speaker's platform where rose petals would be showered on them by wing walker Gladys Roy from a plane circling above. Amid all this excited plannings, new orders came from General Patrick in Washington. The Flyers were now to stop in Santa Monica before Seattle. A win. A weather delay postponed the arrival of the circumnavigators to September 23rd. The Flyers were expected at 2:00 p.m. Rodeos and appearances by Hollywood stars were arranged to keep the crowds entertained while they waited. Mayor Steele declared the day a city holiday, so everyone in Santa Monica could attend. Before daybreak, Santa Monica streets were thronged as tens of thousands of spectators streamed in from all directions. The New York Times covered the events in Santa Monica, noting warm reunions with family members and the return home of the airships to their birthplace. As the planes approached Clover Field, the pilots looked down at thousands of cars parked fender to fender in rows a mile long and a mile wide in the area surrounding the airport. The field itself was thronged with somewhere between 100,000 and 250,000 enthusiastic spectators. As they touched down, a cloud of dust and rose petals flew into the air. The crowd burst through the fencing and the police line to get close to the aviators. They tore at the aviators' clothes, cutting pieces off with penknives, and at the planes, trying to grab a piece of history to take home. Women fainted and children were separated from their guardians in the melee. The pilots finally made it to the safety of the podium. From there, Lieutenant Smith, noting the crowds that had engulfed them, remarked, "The biggest moment in our lives came today at Clover Field. This welcome of you, Southern California, makes us feel, well, it almost brings tears to our eyes. It was the greatest response of any place in the world." The flyers were presented with purses and bouquets of flowers by young starlets. Congressman J.D. Freericks came and gave a speech.
About 190 days ago, the world flight endeavor started from this field. Now we've gathered to welcome you home, to the end of the trail, the goal of your exploit. It was here at Santa Monica that the planes were built. From this field was launched the historic flight that has culminated today in this splendid outpouring of the Southland to honor the Superman of the air. It matters not technically how far the flight continues from here. This field, at this moment, in the present of this gathering, marks the true end of the trail.
That's what happens when a kid grows up hearing these stories at the kitchen table every night. The Santa Monica Outlook reveled in the fact that the last two stops of the trip received little press coverage. Only 50,000 people were there to welcome the Flyers in Seattle. For those keeping score, the round-trip flight from Santa Monica began on March 17, 1924 at 9:32 a.m. It made 72 stops in 22 countries. I don't know why I didn't write that there. And ended on September 23, 1924 at 2:47 p.m. It lasted for 6 months and 6 days. 21 years earlier, the Wright brothers built a plane that sustained flight for just under 1 minute. Now the world had been circumnavigated by air, beginning and ending in Santa Monica, California. The Douglas Aircraft Corporation adopted a new slogan, "First around the world." Seattle still thinks it happened there. So that's really what I have for you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have or hear any of your comments or anything like that, and Anne's going to help us with that.
I heard that it moved, that the airport moved from where it is now, that it used to be further north, is that right?
Well, there wasn't really an airport anywhere in the area, well, there was an airport in Venice.
No, I mean, like, it used to be closer, like Ocean Park.
Oh, do you want to put the slide back up?
Was it off of Wilshire?
No, she's going to show you. I think what she's saying, the airport expanded many times. So it started out as a 172-acre parcel that they bought. It was a barley field. And one strip of it on one side was an airstrip. And the rest was just land. And then Douglas Aircraft was growing and growing over on Wilshire Boulevard and said, okay, we are becoming a big deal and we can't continue to be in Santa Monica if you just have a rented airfield and you have to buy that place or we're going somewhere else. And so that put the impetus on the city to figure out a way to buy it. And they didn't. So this was the original strip when it was a barley field. And the city...
Where is that located?
This is 28th Street, Centinela, Ocean Park Boulevard, and that's the South City limit.
So the runway was on...
Where the airport is today.
Right. It's the same location. So basically they decided they needed to figure out a way to pay for it. They wanted to use a bond. They had to pay for the bond. Aviation was not a paying industry. And they realized if they had and there had already been a campaign to have a municipal golf course at the city that had been going on for a while. And so they realized, hey, let's marry these two ideas together. Golf is like super popular. It was the 1920s. And the golf courses in LA are super crowded all the time. Golf will help pay the bond, and we'll own all this land. We'll have a golf course, we'll have an airfield. Douglas Aircraft will stay, and everybody will be happy. So that's what they did. So part of the deal is that Douglas Aircraft contracted from the beginning to buy 7.5 of those 172 acres, and that's what this blue cutout is. So these diagrams are all in the book. So
Is the green the golf?
the green is the park area. It was a golf course and it had a few other amenities along this edge here. So basically that was how...
The Douglas wasn't at this location. It was off of Wilshire, near 23rd?
Yeah, 25th and Wilshire. And then he started building that they...
There was no landing field there, huh? On Wilshire.
No, well, planes landed there, but their planes were getting too big. And this strip began in 1921, and a certain guy, Edwin Fisk, leased it from the guy who was leasing the barley field and used it to test a plane he was building. And then he said to the city, hey, I'm going to register my airstrip with the government and make it a real airstrip. Do you want me to call it the Santa Monica Municipal Airport? And the city was like, sure. So that was really how it started. So I forgot what else you just asked me, but that was how it started. And then they were compelled to purchase.
There was an airstrip in Santa Monica before this, but it was too small for Douglas.
Well, there wasn't really an airstrip. They were at what is now Douglas Park. They had a factory there, and planes were really small, so they could take off and land from that parcel. They could just do it there. And after they moved to the airport, they had stopped landing planes there. But Charles Lindbergh, who wasn't famous yet and worked for TWA, he didn't know that. So he actually showed up one day in his plane and landed there, and they were like, whoa, dude. And then he left. So he was actually the last guy to fly from Douglas Park. So are there any other questions? Michael?
Where did Donald live?
Where did he live? Well, his first home in Santa Monica was on 5th Street in Ocean Park for a very short time. They leased it, and then they moved to a house on 10th Street where they lived for several more years. I think it was near Santa Monica Boulevard. And then in the 1930s, when by then he was like a big shot mogul, he had a brother-in-law, his wife's sister's husband, was an architect. And that guy, that guy designed his first factory here also. And his house, which was on San Vicente and 14th Street, built a big mansion there that overlooks the bluff. And that architect built some additions to his factory and was his architect until he got divorced from his sister-in-law, and then he got a new architect. Anything else? Yeah?
How do you see the future of this story continuing, obviously by writing the book, but as we move into the future, how do we continue to honor this place and this history?
Well, one of the things I noted in the book is that ever since Donald Douglas started getting accolades, every couple of years or every decade or so, there would be a movement to put in a giant monument or a plaque or something to Donald Douglas and the history of aviation that happened there. And most of those movements didn't go anywhere. So I'm still waiting for that monument. But in terms of the future, I mean, I don't know what the future is. What I generally say about it, I mean, most of you know I'm also a planning commissioner, so I get a little bit up to my neck in all of these city things, and I am trying to distance myself somewhat because I think this story is really important. But one thing I have said publicly that I stand by is whatever happens, that there are a lot of things left on the airport that you can still see that tell this story, and however it evolves, transparency to make sure that we can still see that history, that you can still walk around this area and learn this story and the place where it happened is a really important thing.
Thank you, I was hoping that's what your answer would be.
Yes.
And there's the Museum of Flying.
There's also a Museum of Flying.
You know, which is going to stay there and honors the history of what happened in Santa Monica. So even as we transition to using public land for a public purpose and having a park there, we've got, the history will be honored in different ways, both, I think, on the park land
Right.
and also at the museum. And if you haven't been to the museum, go.
Yeah.
Did Douglas or the company have anything to do with building houses in the neighboring area for workers? Because I've always heard that area was built by Douglas.
No, I spent a lot of time digging pretty deep into those stories and those legends, and he never built a stick of housing. There's a apartment complex on Ocean Park Boulevard, the little pink and blue houses. I'm sure many of you are familiar with them. Those were actually our first experiment in dense housing in Santa Monica. That was our first R3 zone. And the guy who built those, got his money because he was the treasurer for Amy Semple McPherson, which is a weird piece of trivia. This is what happens when you just keep going. And he ran out of money before he finished it, got a job at Douglas Aircraft, and sold them to a different developer who finished the project. The other set of buildings in Santa Monica, there's these little houses that look very much alike on Pine and Maple Street, like in there, and a lot of people say, oh, those were built for the executives. First of all, the executives lived north of Montana, just like today. Second, those houses, there are 27 of them, and they are all very similar, and they were all built by a woman who came here from the Midwest, let's say, I forgot which state. She came from the Midwest. Her husband was an insurance agent and a life insurance agent, got hit by a car, was very well insured. She came to Santa Monica because she had family here and used her payout to invest in real estate, and she built those 27 houses. So the only thing he built were factories for airplanes and the Aero Theater.
Do you want to share a little about the Aero Theater history too, just as it relates to Douglas? Or?
Well, by the time that was going on and the war was building up, even before the United States entered the war, President Roosevelt had put out a call that he wanted, I think it was 1933, 5, somewhere in there. He wanted, I think it was 15,000 planes built that year. And that was about as many planes that had ever been built since the beginning of aviation. And so he wanted to double it. And Donald Douglas was like, yes, we can. And he was kind of a leader in that movement to build all those planes and built a lot of planes. So in order to accomplish this and to get it done in the amount of time, and especially as the war wore on, he ended up having 3 8-hour shifts around the clock. So there were a whole bunch of businesses, restaurants, bars, all kinds of things that opened up along Ocean Park Boulevard. There were activities and things in the park area. You know, there's archery and tennis, and for a while there was a what they call Veterans Field, which was a baseball diamond right there. And all of these things were built for the Douglas Aircraft employees so that they could access them at any time depending on when their shift was. And everything was open around the clock, and there was a lot of partying and stuff going on. And when they started bringing women, I just have to say this last thing, there was a bomb shelter at Douglas Aircraft because obviously it was very vulnerable. But when they started bringing women into work in the plant, they had to lock up the bomb shelter because of the hanky-panky. Yeah.
You mentioned that 4 planes started the trip around the world. Only 2 originals completed it, and there was a substitute.
Right, they built a prototype first. They tested it, and then they...
Do any of those planes that survived the trip exist today? Are they anywhere?
I think I'm pretty sure there is, because I was just at the Museum of Flying the other day talking to someone, and I think they said, I can't remember where he said it was, but there is one and they want to bring it back to the Museum of Flying in Santa Monica. I bet Jack knows.
Yeah, so that one is currently owned by the Los Angeles Natural History Museum.
Oh, okay.
For some reason, and not the Science Center. It's weird to me. But it's currently sitting in pieces in a climate-controlled storage container in Torrance.
Okay, there's your answer.
Yeah, but thankfully I've gotten to be able to see it when I was very young.
Yeah.
When they used to have it here.
You're still very young.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, can you tell us how much the role of women changed both in aviation and then just working in Santa Monica? Did that have an impact on women's culture here?
Well, the Women's Air Derby, definitely. The Women's Air Derby, the reason those women wanted to participate, I think there were 137 or so licensed women aviators in the world at that time. And they were doing very well. A lot of them even had commercial licenses and were driving people and freight, or flying people and freight across the country and so forth. And they really wanted to make a big splash and just be role models for women that they could participate in aviation, and to make sure that the industry stayed open to women. And literally the day they landed in Ohio at the end of the Derby, they met under the bleachers and started a group which became the 99s, which is still around today with 7,000 or more members across the world. So as far as Douglas Aircraft and the Rosie the Riveters, that was a little bit of a different story. A lot of those women, when the men came back from war and so forth, they were happy to go back to their traditional roles of the 1940s and 50s at home and let the men go back to work. So I'm sure there were some people who were influenced by that and didn't want to give up their place in the workforce, but it was not as dramatic as we could have hoped. So.
You said at the beginning that the Navy initially took the initiative to get the planes built, right? And then, I noticed in the newsreel, all of a sudden it became the Army.
Oh, maybe I said the wrong thing.
Oh, okay.
I thought it was the Navy. Maybe it was the Navy that bought the first set of planes when after the Cloudster, but it was the Army that ran there was no such thing as the Air Force. The Air Force came later, and that was established by an Army guy, Hap Arnold, who was a good friend of Donald Douglas and whose son married Donald Douglas's daughter. So it was all very close-knit.
Can you talk a bit about the camouflage that happened? I heard about that.
Yeah, so when Pearl Harbor happened, everybody freaked out. And because Douglas Aircraft, because, yes, I can, we can build these planes, he was kind of a leader in that movement. There were already shortages in supplies and he kind of helped organize a coalition of different airplane manufacturers to work together to share resources to make sure everyone could get what they needed so they could all stay in production and so forth. So Douglas Aircraft was really kind of, and he also had a think tank because he was, like I said, he was a brilliant manager of companies as well as an airplane engineer. And so he was doing a lot of strategizing about war and preparation as they knew they were going to be in World War II. And a lot of that thinking was happening at Douglas Aircraft in a think tank he established. So when Pearl Harbor happened, the Army had protocols for how to camouflage key places that needed to be protected in the case of war. But they were way ahead of them at Douglas Aircraft, and they had already been consulting with Warner Brothers, where their scenic artists had ideas, and they just said, we don't need your protocols, we've got our own idea. And they put in, I think it was like 900 basically telephone poles all along, and it was on both sides of Ocean Park Boulevard, because they had miles and miles of parking, not miles, but blocks and blocks of parking, which would also have been noticeable from the sky for somebody who's looking for an airplane factory to bomb. And so it went over the parking and the factory, and it was made of layers of fiberglass, so a little bit of light could get through. And they tested all the paints and the colors that they used under infrared light, so that if the planes going overhead were looking for weird things that didn't look right, it would blend in perfectly. So, and it had little fake balsa wood houses above, and they just built airplanes underneath. It was pretty amazing. Sometimes aviators would get lost coming to Santa Monica to land because they couldn't find the airport. So, oh, and there's one other, I mean, you can read the book, but over here, they actually built a dummy factory with a big dome because they figured they knew that the enemy knew that they had that giant hangar, and so they built something that looked like it. And for a couple of years after the war, they considered using that area, but they ended up not making it part of the airport.
Did it ever go beyond Sentinella or Bundy, like on the east side?
Well, this was Sentinella. So there's actually some displays in the back there that you can look at that have like some pretty cool photos. But the problem, this airfield was not perfectly flat. It still isn't. There's still like weird things going on. But the runway, like in this period, this was the road, Sentinella was about 8 feet above the level of the runway. And it took many remodeling campaigns to get it flat, and it had finally become flat up to there. And then they needed to, they were building bigger and bigger planes, and they were talking about getting the B-19 off the ground. And the joke was, well, we're going to have to back it all the way up to the berm and then take out the fence and take out a few houses in order for it to be able to take off. So that's actually why it started to extend a little bit. But Donald Douglas, who, with all of his foresight from very early on, he bought up this subdivision, and then when the Army took over, they basically bought a lot of it from him, or that was how they extended the airport all the way to here. And then the US government did more eminent domain to extend it this far. So it didn't really move, but it changed shape in all these directions. So what they did here is, if you look at aerial photography, you can see that there was a hill here, and that over here was the far side of the hill. The hill had been, into the airport, and they cut into it. So by putting Bundy here, it was naturally lower than where the field was, and they cut the top off of the hill. So the airplanes come in 8 feet above the roadway. I don't know if that was clear, but you can look at the pictures and then it'll be clear. Anything else? I guess we're good. Oh, one more.
I've always wondered at Clover Park about the big divot that's there in the earth. It's adjacent to the airport. Was that a bunker?
No, that was the reservoir. Douglas Park has its own amazing story. But basically, when the city was founded, Jones and Baker owned the entire rancho, which was 30,000 acres, included Brentwood and all kinds of areas everywhere. And Curavunga Springs was where the city got their water. And they built tunnel pipes and brought the water to that reservoir. And that was the main source for the city. And then in 1916, the city, by then there were a bunch of different water companies, and the city bought them all up and made it a municipal water company, and soon abandoned that particular source. So after 1916, we didn't get water from Curavunga Springs for the city anymore. And they planted walnut trees there to make it productive. And they rented the Douglas Park to a film company. And the film company was actually what rented it to Douglas Aircraft, not the city. It was a sublease. And the film company used the money from Douglas Aircraft to pay back their back debt, because they weren't a very successful film company. And so.
And I knew about the reservoir at Douglas, but at Cloverfield Park. Are you familiar with that area?
Oh, you're talking about the right over here. The low spot right there. That's just, it was a lumpy area. It wasn't flat. I mean, even at the airport today, over here, there's like a huge drop on this side of the thing. It's just not flat. It's just not flat land.
Okay. Thank you.
Judith?
Well, actually, if I recall, when the city put in the field, the lower field, I remember because I looked for Stan Shaw, who was the works director, and he said that was retention. He built it as retention area, so that when it would rain. I don't know if it was ever used that way, but that was the idea.
So you think so you're saying they dug it?
Yes, back in, I think this was in the 80s.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. The 80s is too recent for me.
I know.
Last question.
So obviously there's a mandate to close the airport, but then I also heard that somebody wanted to do a small space with vertical takeoff and landings for emergencies here. We're on opposite ends here. But have you heard of that?
It's not my area.
Yeah, I'm just thinking if it cropped up.
Too recent for me.
Right, the history.
With the historical significance of the airport, thank you very much for researching it so well and teaching us really what a very historically significant place it is. Has anyone ever thought of having a reenactment with vintage planes coming to the airport to commemorate that event, since that's happened?
I think it was in the 60s or 70s, air shows were banned from Santa Monica. That was the end of air shows. And I'm pretty sure that if somebody tried to do an air show today, there would be a revolution, so I don't recommend it.